finished with him, took me aside and said, when he said down south, he didn't mean Wichita.
No, he didn't mean Wichita.
He meant Thunder Bay.
Yeah. See, I flew with those boys up at Cold Lake, and in the summer it's Cold Lake. I just say, all right, we are in the section. We slipped that section, and I left in 22 because that was the last place we kind of went. The Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, was caused to be in Jerusalem. It was stormy weather. And I noted, I think it's really important, and I'm glad that you pointed out to us that, yeah, we don't find it in the Old Testament. Hanukkah is not in the Old Testament, but what we call the Old Testament today. It's in the New Testament, and it's also in the Apocrypha. But I want to remind you, the Apocrypha was always in your Bible until 1826, and they pulled it out because of printing costs. So every Bible to 1826, that's less than 200 years or so, right? We're almost up to 200 years for 1826. So for, let's calculate that, about 1,800 years, the Bible had the, at least when it's written, okay, so let's say at least 1,700 years, the Bible always had the Apocrypha in it, but for the last 200 years, you haven't had it, so maybe you should get it. But because of that, I have it for you. And I got parts of it, and I also have some documents. Okay, so I have the documents here that we can look at. So here's about Hanukkah. I always want to make sure that we have a basis for all this good information. This is, I've got the, whatever you call it, the references for this. A minor Jewish festival, unlike Jewish holidays known as Festival of Lights. It's not mentioned, look at this, see, not mentioned in the Bible. That's either a Jewish source or a modern Christian source, which is kind of sad. But look what it says. Historical events upon which celebration is based is recorded in Maccabees 1 and 2. And by the way, Maccabees 1 is considered completely historical. I would argue Maccabees 2 is pretty close, although there's some funny things in Maccabees 2, but still 1 and 2 are, 1 is definitely considered total historical source. 2 has got a little bit of interesting things in it, but you just have to dig deep into it. We did when we did the Apocrypha, that was years ago. They can, see, it says known as the Apocrypha. Now, the later collection of writings known as the Apocrypha. Well, what do we know about the later collection of writings known as the Apocrypha? We know they're the Apocrypha because the Apocryphal works were written in Greek, except for a couple, which the Council of Jamnia made a mistake about, and also so did Martin Luther and those guys, because they were actually written in Hebrew and later translated into Greek, because we know what happened, right? Alexic, Septuagint. So the Septuagint writings, I think, when would he finish? Was it 275 BC? I haven't looked at the date in a while. But anyway, the Septuagint, by the time of the Septuagint, as far as we know, all of the Apocrypha and the Greek documents were already incorporated, as well as the Hebrew documents in the Septuagint. And the Council of Jamnia was about 80 to 100 AD, or 90 to 100 AD or so. And that's when the Jewish leaders decided to pull the Greek documents out of the Hebraic Tanakh. So the Tanakh does not include any Greek documents, or those two that they thought were Greek. The two they thought were Greek, I think, was the two they thought were Greek was Ben Sirach, Jesus Ben Sirach, and there's another one, maybe Ecclesiasticus. Anyway, there are, and like I said, I think Martin Luther made a mistake because he followed the Council of Jamnia, or the ideas of the Council of Jamnia, and then pulled those Greek documents out. So here's the history, and this is synopsized history from this source. In the year 168 BCE, the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes. So obviously, this would have had to been past this point in which the Maccabees was written. the Syrians desecrated the temple and the holiest place, the Jews, and you can say before Christ BC. Antiochus abolished the Judaism, outlining the observance of the Shabbat and the festivals, as well as circumcision. And I told you the problem. I said last week, I guess I'll repeat a little bit. This is the way that you handled. This is the way you handled cultures. The Romans were smart. The Romans were the smartest group. They figured it out because we're going to find out what happened to Antiochus because of what he did. But obviously, when you interfere with people's religions, what happens? They revolt. They get upset. It's the problem for Antiochus. What is the problem with Antiochus? Now you notice it's the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes. But Antiochus was what?
Roman?
No,
he was Seleucid.
Yeah, he's Greek. Yeah, he's Greek because remember Alexander the Great, right? Came and created. He took over Thebes. He took over all of Greece. That was one of the big things. He's Macedonian. He went in and took over all of Greece. So he controlled all of Greece. It was a Grecian empire. Then he went over and he took over the Egyptian empire. So Egypt was Greek from what is it? 332 BC, right? 332. What's that?
Something like that.
Yeah, close to that. 332. So he took over all of Egypt. So Egypt, Cleopatra was Greek. All of the leadership was Greek. They spoke Greek. They also spoke a little Egyptian, but walked like an Egyptian stuff. And then he went and took over the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire was Persia and all that other area. And so Syria happened to be Antiochus Epiphanes. They had broken the kingdom into three parts after Alexander's death, into the Macedonian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Seleucid Empire, and the Egyptians. And this is that stuff we call the history of civilization and Western civilization that apparently we don't teach in the schools anymore, but it's okay. You can plagiarize all you want, but they don't learn anything. So it's a great thing in the world. But in any case, the way that they handled it is, if you remember, the world was Hellenized. And it was Hellenized because there is an assumption about about gods. The assumption about gods is if you bring your gods, let's say, like Alexander the Great, right, brought the Greek gods into the Seleucid Empire, into the Egyptian Empire. Okay, what does that mean about the Egyptian gods and the gods of Syria? Who's better? The Greek gods. If the Greeks wipe you out, that means Greek gods are the guys. So what happened with Hellenization is not only did they accept the language, the literature, the culture, all those other good things from the Greeks, they also accepted the gods, except for one group. One group was notoriously unwilling to accept those gods, and that was the Jews. And the thing was, the Jews practice, and I want you to remember this because, we cast the good guys and the bad guys. All right, yeah, okay, the Jewish people are the good guys in my opinion, right? But we cast the good guys and the bad guys. But if you look culturally, so the Greeks came in and they saw that the Jews had this mesoncline. They had a wall around the temple with an altar inside the temple wall. That is an abomination to them because you don't do sacrifices within a temple. You go look at every Greek temple in the world. Where's the altar? It's outside in the front because they sacrifice the animals outside of the temple. And if you sacrifice an animal inside the temple, that was an apostasy. That was an abomination. The gods would punish you. So what did they do? They went into Jerusalem. They destroyed the mesoncline. That's the thing around it. And they basically began sacrificing to Zeus on the altar. Well, what do you sacrifice to Zeus? Pigs, swine. Right? Greeks, like I told you, have the best pork in the world. It's good stuff. Anyway, that's what they were doing. And if you see it, they, of course, they outlawed the observance of Sabbath in the festivals. Why? Why would you outlaw the festivals?
It brings tons of people into the city.
They're sacrificing their own stuff at the temple.
Yeah. Well, because okay, so if you're worshiping Zeus and all of a sudden you're worshiping some other god, right? You can't do that. It would be an apostasy to your religion, right? It's kind of the way that religions take over. Islam takes over by building in the highest point of every city and then beginning to, take over with the way they do it. It's even written in the Quran. It's one of their, jihads, a method of jihad. Anyway, this is the way it works. And so you take over the festivals and Shabbat. Unfortunately, the Jewish people weren't into that. And so what you see is, here's some more information. It's really interesting. Historically, for the day of the Jewish month of Kislev, in 168 BC, temple was renamed for the Greek god Zeus. But you didn't know that. Jewish resistance movement led by a priestly family known as Hasmoneans of the Maccabees. The Maccabees, this is the great Hasmonean Maccabean revolution that's written about in the Maccabees. They developed resist cruelty of Antiochus. This was caused a huge problem. The head of the family was Matthias. Let's see if it talks about his son Judah. All right, now here's the thing. Okay, the Maccabeans were not Aaronites. They were not from the family of Aaron. They were Levites. We believe they were Levites. They claimed to be Levites, but even that is in some question. But that's okay. The book of Maccabees 1 tells us that they were. And his son Judah, he had 7 sons, I think. His chief strategist, military leader. They fighters miraculously won major battles, routing the Syrians. And you notice they call them Syrians. They're not Syrians, they're Seleucids. They're Greeks. They're Greeks. It's really important to note these are Greeks, okay? It's amazing how what is it? You take a map and you say, well, there's no more Greeks in that part of the world anymore. It's all Syria, right? Well, that may be true now, but what did they think they were then, right? This is called cultural appropriation of the highest point, right? It's like, no, you can't change history that way. This is the way the world was. It ain't Syria. It's Greeks. It's like Egypt, right? Egyptian, Cleopatra. All the Cleopatras from 232. All the leadership of Egypt was Greek. Period. Dot. But yet, what do we get today? I don't know what we get today. I'm not even sure if they understand what they understand because they don't understand anything. But they were Greek. They were not Egyptian. Anyway.
In our modern worldview, we look at Syrians and think Arabs.
Yeah. Well, this came out of, remember, Torah class, which cracked me up. In Torah class, why are all the children of Israel pictured as Islamic people wearing Islamic robes and, that kind of thing? It isn't historical. They were all wearing Egyptian robes. They wore Egyptian clothing because they came out of Egypt. That's obvious, right? The only problem is we didn't have any pictures. And plus the Victorians didn't like the idea of having half-naked people running around in half-naked clothing like the Egyptians wore. So what did they do? They went to Israel, they went to post-Islamic Palestine, post-Islamic, there's no Palestine, post-Islamic, Middle East, and they saw, oh, this is the way the people wear clothes. But it wasn't. It never was, right? By the way, Jerusalem was Christian. Matter of fact, the Jerusalem area was Christian until about what? 800 AD. You knew that, right? But I think I don't think they conquered until around 700, 7, 8. I'll give you that, 7, 8, close. That's a long time. Interesting. Any case, so historians debate whatever the cause and outcome of the war. Judah Maccabee, they do. It's interesting. They defeat the Syrian armies. No doubt that Hanukkah involves the images of the Jewish valor, themes of the holiday, refusal to submit to religious demands of empire, practicing idolatry, struggle against total assimilation to Greek culture, loss of Greek Jewish identity, the fight of Jewish political and autonomy, etc. It means dedication. The festival commemorates purification, rededication to Kimball, following the Greek occupation. Today, the holiday reminds the Jews to rededicate themselves, keeping alive the flame of Jewish religion, culture, and the people to be passed to the next generation. And here's the miracle. There was a miracle of the oil. The original 8-day holiday was intended to parallel the 8 days festival of Sukkot. The books of the Maccabees make no mention of the legend concerning a small jar of oil that unexpectedly lasted 8 days. Only centuries after Maccabees defeated the Syrians, the story of the jar of oil, which comes to associate with Hanukkah, appear in the Talmud. The Talmud. Talmud. We have the Mishnah and the Talmud. The Talmud is the commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. Wasn't written down to about 100 AD or so. We have the Jerusalem Talmud. We have the Babylonian Talmud, and that's what I've shown you my copy. I have a copy of not quite the whole, but it's huge. The documents of the Mishnah are huge. According to legends, when the Maccabees entered the temple, began to reclaim it from the Greeks, they relit the Ner Tamid, which burns constantly in the temple. The Ner Tamid. Okay, this is really cool. This is that candlestick, right? The 7-thing candlestick. It's not a candlestick, it's an oil stick. Why do you have the Ner Tamid? What's it used to do? It lights, right? It lights. No, it doesn't light. It lights what?
It keeps fire.
It keeps fire burning for the sacrifice. Yes. We have okay, number one, remember when we calculated the size of it? When we calculated the amount of gold, I think it's 60 pounds of gold or something. It's pretty heavy. 60 pounds of gold makes something this big. If you make it out of bronze, how big is it? 5 feet, which is really interesting because the ones that were shown in the temple and written about in the Talmud are 5 feet high, but if you made it out of gold, it would be tons. So that's impossible. So when they make it out of 60 pounds of gold, 60 pounds of gold makes a Ner Tamid that's, what do you call that? What's that thing called? Menorah. A menorah, basically, that's this tall. And it was not for lighting anything. That lighting, meaning it wasn't to produce illumination. It was only there to keep the fire burning so they could light the sacrifice. And that's the big deal. They relit it, which burned constantly in the temple. The reason it burned constantly was because it was the light, it was the fire. A parallel in the synagogues. Okay, this is a Greek source or a Jewish source. In the temple, they found a single jar of oil, which was sufficient for only 1 day. The messenger was sent to secure additional oil. It took 8 days. Okay, there's more to this picture. All right, what's the problem about securing additional oil? What's the big deal about this oil? Can you just go milk an olive tree to get the oil?
No, you have to make it a certain way.
Yeah. Remember when we went through the Torah? The oil has to be made specifically and sanctified. You just can't squish the olives and give you your oil and then use it. You gotta sanctify it and purify it and do all this stuff to it to make it right. And it says in the Torah how it has to be done. So it took a while to do it. It says it took 8 days to complete the mission. It took 8 days to make the oil properly so it could be used in the temple. Miraculously, a single jar of oil continued to burn till it was returned. The rabbis of the Talmud attributed the 8 days of Hanukkah to the miracle of this single jar of oil. And here's the modern observance. The practice of lighting menorah was common throughout the 19th century. North American Jews tended to neglect most of the other practices of the holiday. By the 1920s, they began doing more and more of the Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the Jewish Christmas. Yeah. Some ways, the transformation of Hanukkah is linked to the North American Jewry, which is interesting. Elevation of Hanukkah, a major holiday, is partly the result of Jews acculturating themselves in North America, which is interesting. Overwhelmingly Christian population and symbols. Hanukkah became an important holiday in North America and Jews by the 1920s. It was incorrect to regard as the imitation of Christmas, emphasis on exchange of gifts, celebration of family. We know it's really interesting. And this is from Judaism 2023. Notice that none of this need to be written for the audience if it's Jewish or Hebrew. My point is about the dedication, right? You don't need to even mention that unless you're talking about Jewish, or if you're talking to Jewish or Hebrew people, only to the Greeks or the Romans. Yes, sir.
I was just curious if with the custom with Hanukkah is similar to Passover, that only females are allowed to light the candles, or if that's not doesn't apply to Hanukkah.
Oh, I don't know.
That's curious.
That's a great question, because one of the mitzvot, one of the mitzvots that men cannot light the light before Shabbat. It's illegal. Only women can light the light. And I don't know. That's a great question. I didn't think about that. It's a really cool question. Let's see. Why did I say this? Oh, okay. I want to note this. Remember, we had the previous one was about being the man who was born blind, right? The man who was born blind. It related into the whole thing about the sheep and the shepherds, but the time difference between that incident and this incident is 9 months. So I didn't put it on a scale, but it's really interesting. Isn't it interesting that the people who decided to chapterize, right, the pieces, split the chapter of the man born blind and ended it, especially with the question of Jesus' Pharisees. And then we get in 22, not quite halfway through, this split, the dedication, with 9 months in between it. So Jesus was doing something for 9 months we don't know about. It just wasn't important to John because it wasn't within the context. Here's the apocryphal allusion from First Maccabees, Battle of Emmaus. And let's see, I won't go through the whole thing. You can do it yourself. This is First Maccabees 4, relating to, let's see, where is this? Cleansing, dedication to the temple. All right. Early in the morning, on the 25th day of the 9th month, this is what we're talking about, the month of Chislev, in 148th year, they rose and offered sacrifices. The law directs on the new altar burnt offering, which they had built at the very season on the day the Gentiles had profaned it. It was dedicated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals. All the people fell on their faces, worshiped and blessed heaven, who had prospered them. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness. They offered a sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decorated the front of the temple with golden crowns and small shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests. They furnished them with doors. There was a great gladness among the people, and the reproach of the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season, the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed with gladness and joy for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Chislev. Now, the thing I want to point out is, do you see this connection? They had to have the oil, the fire, right, for 8 days because they did what? Yeah, 8 days of sacrifice, right? So unless the fire is burning, you can't do the sacrifice. So there is a connection. Although the point is this: we find this, and I should have got the Talmud part too. But we see this recorded in the Talmud, that is the 8-day miracle, but not in Maccabees. First Maccabees is considered a really good historical source. I think that's interesting. So anyway, there's your little Maccabees for the day.
Second Maccabees has an account too, but it also doesn't mention the oil miracle.
Yeah, and I think, okay, first and second Maccabees, great historical sources. I think they're worth reading all the time. Good. Third and fourth Maccabees, might as well read them. They're interesting documents, but they're not. They're more prophetic kind of stuff. They're not really historical, quite as historical in nature, but they're worth reading. All the apocryphal documents are worth reading. That's what the church said for years. I think they still said it. Martin Luther said it. Might as well do it, right? So, what's really interesting here, though, is, okay, so we are at Hanukkah. So this is about, approximately December-ish time frame. I didn't make the scale of how far. It can be into November up into December, but in that relative area, right, of time. Remember, I've given you, I didn't this time, but, I've given you before the Torah calendar from the Jewish calendar and tried to align it with our calendar and stuff and fit it. But it's Hanukkah, the dedication, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. What's Jesus doing in the temple? Sacrificing. I think he's sacrificing. Why does it need to tell us that?
Because I already said it was the festival of dedication.
Well, yeah, and also, why do you go to the temple? To sacrifice. Yeah. Why do you go to synagogue?
To hear the word.
Hear the word, pray,
Yeah.
get some learning.
Jesus is always in a synagogue. Why?
He's teaching.
He's a rabbi of Capernaum. Of course he's in a synagogue. He's working every day. He's probably teaching little kids, right? Maybe he has other rabbis, under him that's helping. But the rabbi did all that stuff. And what you do in a synagogue you pray and you read and you study. But in the temple, there's only one thing you do. You don't even pray in the temple. You don't pray. You sacrifice. You celebrate. The festivals are in the temple because the whole point of the sacrificial system, and we went through all the Torah, right, was for the remission. Well, what sins can be remitted? What sins can be forgiven? By sacrifice. Only unintentional sins. That's what it says. That's what the Talmud says. That's what the Bible says. The Old Testament says. So they knew this, and it was a problem. So they're waiting for the Messiah because only in the Messianic age can you be forgiven for sins. And what's the sacrifice? Well, that's a great question. So Jesus was in the temple courts, and this implies that he had already eaten, or he probably already sacrificed. He was in the thing. Here's the Greek. I've got it written out for you. That's the NIV. All right, here's the Greek, simple one. Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's court. Kai and peripeteia. He was walking all around. I love this word peripeteia. To walk all around, because there are different words in Greek for walking, for moving. But when you see this word, it doesn't mean that you're wandering necessarily. It means you're walking around in an organized way, but it just, you're kind of sauntering, kind of doing your thing, right? So he's walking all around, Jesus, into the sacred place, the temple, into a pillar supporting a portico of Solomon. And Jesus is walking all around in the sacred place, in the pillar of Solomon. All right. And I've got a little bit of thing explaining that in Greek. I won't need to tell you too much. Let's see where it is. I have a note here. Yeah, this notes are kind of interesting. This is from Strong's portico, a porch built by Solomon in the east part of the temple, which in the temple's destruction by the Babylonians was left uninjured, remained down to the times of King Agrippa, to whom the care of the temple was entrusted by the Emperor Claudius. And the account of antiquity that it was there, it was demolished according to Josephus. So anyway, and it just, okay. The use of the term stoa instead of a more descriptive word is a figure of speech. In other words, Jesus is going to talk about the pillars of the logical arguments of the temple. Our translators miss the point and fix it so we don't get the figure of speech. Stoa, this is a word that's used as stoa, a pillar supporting a covered colonnade, a portico usually open on its side so people could congregate and talk. The point in that is the word usage in Greek. The word usage in Greek. You notice it uses a word, it says, it doesn't say a portico. It says a stoa. In other words, in the Greek worldview, this word is used, if they had meant it just as an architectural feature, they would have used a different word. That's the point. And my thing here is, and we're going to see what he says, because like I said, the use of the term stoa instead of a more descriptive word that is in Greek, like column, right? Means that he's using a figure of speech, which that's what I told you. In Greek, you don't find very many euphemistic meanings, but you will find figures of speech. And like, for example, a symposium, the word used all the time when, like, for example, when Jesus gathered the people for the feeding of the 5,000, they call it a symposium. Well, what's a symposium in Greek? It's the same thing as a symposium today. It's where you get together and you talk about scientific stuff or philosophy or theology or whatever, right? When I tell you I'm going to a symposia, what do you say? You don't say you're going to a drinking party. You know that you're going to something where you're going to fall asleep halfway through. No, you go to a big meeting of people and people present papers, and yeah, there's eating and drinking, but in the Greek worldview, a symposia is where not only are you eating and drinking, you are communicating, yeah, talking. The Greeks' favorite thing in the whole world to do, eat, drink, and talk. Okay? I mean, that's their thing, right? The translators miss the point because we don't get the figure of speech, which is really hard to convey in English anyway. But here we got the temple compound. So here is Herod's extended temple compound. Here's Solomon's north gate. Here's Solomon's temple compound and Solomon's porch. Here's Solomon's porch. Now, remember the last time we were seeing where Jesus was, is he was right here, right? He was in the treasury, near the treasury, yakking. Now he's over at Solomon's porch. Now, what's interesting about this is, was he coming or going? We don't know. If he was coming, that means he just came from the mikvah, right? Because we saw the mikvah's right out here. So he's ready for teruma. If he's going, he's already had his teruma, and he's meeting the folks coming in, which is an interesting idea. Well, maybe we can figure it out from what.
Where's the Holy of Holies?
Holy of Holies. Here's the temple, and here's the holy place, and here's the Holy of Holies. Way over here. Yeah. Here's the altar.
Where do they eat then?
Aha. This is an amazing question. We know that they killed the animals, that they were supposed to do it at the entrance, but the entrance would be right here. This is where the animals were slaughtered between the men's court and the priest's court. We think, because this is really different than the, remember in the Torah study, we looked at the tent, the tabernacle, right? And the tabernacle was obvious, right, where they did it, because it was in the entrance to the tabernacle. But the temple, this is the third temple. Third temple. And the third temple, you know, it should have been done over here in the entrance, right? But it wasn't. It was done, we think, here. Now, where did they eat? Where did they set up the buffet tables? Where did they have this stuff? That's a great question. We don't know. Now, we do know that the cooking, you know, except for in Passover. In Passover, what did they do? They brought the lambs in, right, and they sacrificed the lambs, and then the people took them home, right? The biggest problem, though, was when you went into the court, what does the law say about the meat? It has to be boiled. Yeah. Which isn't as bad as you think, but it's still bad. The reason it's not as bad as you think is because basically by boiling meat, you're making soup. So you could take these animals and you could cut them up and you could put all the good stuff in there and you would boil it. And the thing is, that's what they had. Okay, I'll re-remind you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to re-remind you because the world is a really different place today. Everybody has a pot, right? And everybody can make their own soup. Nobody had a pot until about maybe the rich people had pots, but the only place you could find a pot in the old world was in an inn. That's why people went to the inns. It's because they could make soup. They had soup. They had food that could be made hot. You didn't have to roast it. You had metal where you could cook things and make them and stuff. The other big problem they had, you know, the other big problem they had, how did people make their bread? Everybody had an oven at home, right? Nobody had an oven at home. The way they made their bread is we're talking about medieval and Renaissance Europe. The people would make their dough at home and they would take the dough to a baker's. And while they waited outside the baker would bake their bread and give it to them and they would take it home. We think that everybody has a bread machine in their house, right? In the Renaissance and in the early period. No, people could not you can't make these foods unless you have metal or you have large items that cost is not easy to make this stuff. You know, you have to have experts and people who do it. And by the way, if anybody made an oven, what if you make your oven wrong? I suspect if we look back in the history records, we find that more people were killed by exploding ovens back in the day because if you get any amount of water in that oven when you're cooking, what happens? It'll explode. Yeah, it kills people. I mean, you know, one of the greatest inventions was the iron stove because iron stoves don't tend to explode or cause real issues and you can heat the house and generally not burn them down.
That's what we have pancakes. We have our American flatbread. That's why they have flatbreads because they were easy to make on a heated stone or whatever. So there was an evolution of that. But
right.
But that's where that came out of.
Well, the great invention is the Dutch oven, and the Dutch ovens were used. You can cook flatbread. You can cook race soda breads and even yeast breads, and you can bake your beans. Right? You know the baked beans. What did the Puritans do with their baked beans? It was the Massachusetts thing. You know what they did, right?
An earthen pot, and they heated.
Well, what they do is they would start the cooking on Saturday, so they didn't have to cook on Sunday because they were following Shabbat rules to a degree, the Jewish Shabbat rules about not doing work on, well, they said Sunday, right? On the Christian Sabbath. Really, all this stuff is historical and deep. And, all this stuff is what we should have teach our kids at Thanksgiving, but I guess they don't teach that anymore. Anyway, so here's the temple. And where did they eat? we don't know, and we're not sure, but it was we don't know. We have no idea. This is one of those things in history that you really want to know this stuff, right? But nobody wrote it down. Why would you write it down? It happened every day, right? And then when everyone was dead after 70 AD, and the temple was destroyed and everything's destroyed, it's like somebody must have thought, maybe we should write this down. No, they were trying to survive because they were dying of hunger, right? So they didn't think about any of that stuff. But yeah, we want to know. I was thinking about back in, my whole life, when I went to college, when I did stuff, it was like, I didn't write down any of that thing. And I probably haven't told my children or whatever about, how I lived, or what I did or anything. But yet I probably should pass it on. They'll probably forget it and it's gone. If you don't write it down, it's lost prosperity. And even today, see right now on your computer, yeah, and it's gone. So anyway, nobody knows. Nobody will know. At least maybe you have videos. So the Jews who were there gathered around him saying, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. Now this is really interesting, right? Now, I'm going to get to this soon. Then came the Jews around him and said to him, how long dost thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Christ, tell us plainly. Number one. All right. This is Greek. I think it's a Greek audience. I think it's a Roman audience. Okay. Is Jesus going to say, yes, I'm the Messiah, if he's Greek? It's going to be a
Tell us.
unstated tell us. It's got to be, right? Because a Greek guy would say, wait, you can't just say it. That's not a possibility. That's not Greek. We don't do that, right? So let's see what he says, because this really gets into an amazing punchline. They surrounded, certainly accordingly, him, the Judeans, and they were making a logical argument to him. Until at some time, look at what it says. Until at some time, the psyche, the mind thoughts of us, you raise up. If you are the Christos, who are they? Agreed. You say to us, to all spokenness, Parasia. All right. Wow. This is really interesting, isn't it? What was the whole point before this? Was about the psyche, right? Sark suke penume. Suke. They ask this question. They make a logical argument to him until at some time the mind, the thoughts and conscious breath of us you raise up. If you are the Christ, you say to us in all outspokenness. Here's the translation. According to the Judeans, surrounded him, and they were making a logical argument to him until at some time you raise up our minds. If you are the Christ, you tell us in all unspokenness. What have they already done? There's an unstated tell us here. What have they already done? They're convinced.
Yeah, figured out that
They're open to the possibility.
yeah,
so.
maybe the Christ at least.
Well, they're convinced that he will at some time raise our minds. Right? They're convinced that at some time you'll raise our minds, unless they're being sarcastic. I don't think they're being sarcastic. I don't see any indication of sarcasm or irony here. They're asking this question because why would this be a logical point? Because what did he do at the feeding of the 5,000? He raised what? Sarks. The sarks, right? He fed them. He fed 5,000 people food. He gave them the bread of life. And he said, I am the bread of life. All right. It's hard to dispute a miracle like that. I mean, obviously, everybody knows it, right? You're supposed to remember way back, I think it's the 3rd or 4th chapter, when he said, I am the bread of life. And before it, he said, I am the psyche, right? And I will raise it up. So now we have this statement, and they're saying, tell us, are you the Christ? They didn't say, are you the Messiah? Like our really super smart Samaritan woman, she said, you are the Christ and the Messiah, which I think is really cool. But here we got some things. I've got this other information. It's all right. The translators just ignored a bunch of Greek words and threw out something they didn't like. They just throw out this raise up in the mind. Leave out all that stuff because, they give us an unconnected but inarticulate, although reasonable sounding statement. But it's completely contrary to what was expressed in the text. Judeans understood the point exactly about raising up the psyche, the mind. They seem to agree, although there's a distinct possibility, like I said, this could be a satire, until at some time you raise up our minds. I don't think it's true. But this is a new logos. This is still the continued logos from before. Thus, Jesus' answer to them. This is, I tell you, we cannot look at these as disparate stories. They're not disparate stories. They're historical logos to tell us. So each logos to tell us is connected, and they have unstated telos. They have these unstated points. Jesus answered, I did tell you, but you don't believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. Let's see what the Greek says, right? We know the Greek is going to tell us something really cool that our translators just decided to throw out. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you believe not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness to me. He concluded for himself. So in other words, Jesus didn't just spout off. He thought about it. He's going to present them an argument about this question. Because did they present a really intelligent question? Yes, a very, very intelligent question. Are you the Christ? Right? Which has huge implications because they already said you're going to raise up our minds. You said you would. We're expecting it. That's cool. We feel like you are, but we want to know, are you, does that mean what it seems to me? He concluded to them, Jesus, I said to you, and you are not persuaded. The toils which I make or do into the name of the Father of me, these they bear witness or testify through. So here it is here's the translation. Jesus concluded for himself to them, I said to you, and you are not persuaded. The toils which I do into the name of my Father, these bear witness through all over of me, through me. So let's see. Jesus said, I told you, you believe not the words I do in my Father's name. They bear witness. It's close, right? It's close. And indeed, this is the telos of the Gospel of John, right here. If you want to mark this, this is the telos of the whole of the Gospel of John. Because the Gospel of John presents us with Simeon, with miracles, with the signs that Jesus did. And what did he just tell them? I mean, this is an unstated telos. The unstated telos is not this. This is a stated telos. The unstated telos is what? They asked him, are you the Christ? And what did Jesus just tell them?
Yeah.
I am, but he did it as an unstated telos. He said, look at the sign. Okay, read the hand, right? Now what is it? Read the hand. Because I'm not listening. Because you're not listening. Because I already did all these signs. I healed the guy that was born blind, right? I fed the 5,000. I healed these guys. I did this. I did all this stuff. It's all written down. It's the miracle from the miracles of the wine. And do they know? They all know. You can't hide this stuff, right? I mean, we like to think, I think this is a really wrong way to think of the Gospels. We like to think of the Gospels like we think of an English novel or an English, like a story, right? But they're not. They're histories. They're histories. And when they're written as histories, when you recognize them as histories, let's say you read a history about Abraham Lincoln. What do you presume about the history of Abraham Lincoln when you read it like in a, let's say, a primary type source, somebody who wrote it from his time? You presume what? Do the people know this about Abraham or not know this about Abraham? They know about it, right? I mean, you wouldn't know about, everybody knew Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin. Everybody knew that, right? Everybody knew he was a lawyer. You write down the information, you're not telling us anything new, you're just putting it into the historical sense so when we pick it up, we read it. That's the same thing true of the Gospels. The Gospels aren't like a novel. They're not there to reveal the protagonist. They're not there to reveal the plot. They're there to tell us the people already knew in general about these things. They wanted to know from John, tell us more. That's what I'm telling you. They wanted to know from John, tell us more. And so John was giving them more and writing it down. But guess what? Everybody there, what did they know?
All these miracles that he had done.
They knew it. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so maybe you knew one of them, and maybe you knew one of them, and maybe you saw one of them, right? But the whole point is that when they're reading this account, they go, oh yeah, I remember, right? Because it's history. It's not a fiction or made up thing. It's real history, and we're getting that pronouncement. What's that?
I keep thinking back when John the Baptist from prison kind of went back to Jesus and said, "Are you the one?"
Yeah.
And Jesus responded, "The lame shall walk, the blind shall see." He didn't come out and state it, but he said these miracles were called out in the Old Testament, and then he's doing these miracles, and that's what he's referring to here. You saw these things, and it says it in the Old Testament. This is the Messiah.
And you know what? I'm going to springboard on that because I love what you just said, because it's absolutely true. That every single person who back 100 years, back in the 1900s, most educated people read and spoke Greek and or knew Greek and Latin to a degree, right? They all knew it. They read the dialogues. They read all this stuff. And so when they picked up the New Testament and read the New Testament, what did they immediately know that Jesus was telling John when they read that?
Messiah.
Yeah, he's the Messiah. Because it's an unstated telos, right? They knew that because they knew that that's the way the Greeks wrote. And so every single person who had read that, now today, it becomes a mystery because Dan Brown and a bunch of idiots who are like, have no clue about Greek culture, about the world or anything else, have probably never read a word of Greek, but they read what people write about it.
Or on the other part is some people think, okay, well, Jesus was just equivocating. He was hiding. He wasn't coming out and saying it straight just because, it wasn't his time yet, or they put a lot of layers on what, but, when you look at it in this Greek way, it is so clear that he is saying over and over again, yeah, I am the Christ, I am the Christ. It's not this ambiguous hiding it.
Right, I agree.
The evangelicals kind of get this thing that, he wasn't telling anyone that he was God.
Well, watch this. I think we have time. I want to get to the punchline because there is a punchline in here that I think will blow everybody away, but it's coming. All right? Here it goes. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. We're still in the sheep, right? But you not believe because you're not my sheep, as I said unto you. And let's see what its Greek says. This is a pretty simple one in Greek. Contrariwise, you are not persuaded. That is because you are not from out among of the probaton, the sheep of my sheep. Now, okay, I think he cleared the problem with the Pharisees, his Pharisees. So his Pharisees are at least, they may not be happy, but they're content. But these aren't his Pharisees anymore. These are generally the Judeans. They're still wanting to know the answer. Are you the Christ? Contrariwise, you're not persuaded because you are not from out among my sheep. The Logos is still about sheep. This is a new section, separate, but still defined by the previous man born blind. The Logos is unstated telos contends about sheep. Look what he says. This is, like I said, this is a continued Logos telos. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. Notice it doesn't say my sheep see me. The sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. Here's what the Greek says. The sheep, the of me, of the phonus, of the tone of me, they hear, and I, that's kego, and I know through personal experience. I know through personal experience them, and they go in the same way with me. My sheep hear my tone, and I know them through personal experience, and they go in the same way with me. Okay, baby. Teen hodos, the way. They go in the same way with me. You know, I really, okay, sure, they follow me, whatever. No, they go in the same way with me. I love this. And I think the next verse, now, we're going to get close to it, but whatever, we're going to run out of time. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. Let's see what it says in the Greek. I want to get to that one. I think I've got the one verse here. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, and shall any man pluck them out of my hand. And I, kego. Kego is, in Greek, is and I. It's kai ego. Didome, I give to them life perpetual. And no, we're not on lease. Look at this one. Ume. That's, in English, it's no not. I love this. It's an absolute negation in Greek. No not. They shall be destroyed away from, fully destroyed, to or into the age. And no, it will seize by force a certain one thing, anyone, someone, out of them, from out of among of the cheros of a hand of me. And I give life perpetual to them, and they shall no not be destroyed away from into the age, and it will not seize any one of them by force from out of my hand. This will become into closer proximity to us as we get into later into John, because this is a huge, important point that he makes to the disciples specifically. Oh well, time now. I think we're running out of time, but we'll stop here. We are almost at the punchline for this. It's this section that answers the question. What's the question on the table?
Are you the Messiah?
Are you the Christ? And they're going to answer the question. And I want you to notice, it was not, are you the Messiah? Which, that's cool. Are you the Messiah? It's all right. But they asked, are you the Christ? Which means they're asking as Greeks and Romans, as well as Hebrews. So I think it's a really, really important point. We'll see what the answer is to that next week, God willing. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at this week and pray.